Welcome to the Analytics Heroes podcast by Modern Data 101, the one and only platform for all things data products and purpose driven analytics. My name is 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐬 Verma, Community Manager at Modern, and I'll be your host. We are thrilled to welcome Rho Lall to the podcast. Rho is a seasoned expert in the field of analytics and data engineering, known for his deep understanding of complexities of data modeling and architecture. With extensive experience in conceptual, logical, and physical dimensional modeling, Rho has been at the forefront of transforming data into actionable insights that drive business success. His ability, with over 15 years of experience, Rho has made a significant impact by leveraging data to drive growth across multiple organizations. For joining us, Rho, welcome to the podcast. To get started, if you could talk a little bit about your recent projects and the work you have been doing.
Yeah, so my most recent project is very much in the analytics engineering space. It's kind of a twofold project. Ethan Aaron is the CEO of Portable, so credit where credit is due. This is not my idea. He, in a post, was saying, as a data team, and he's not alone, results matter. And so just kind of knocking off the to-do list isn't enough. Sometimes you need to help people prioritize and identify what the most important things they should be doing are. And so what he said was, as a data person, you should go to the C-suite. So if you're, director of analytics, or even me, just a independent contributor, that person is going to be in the C-suite. Find those persons, find out what those key business initiatives are, and support those initiatives.
Yes.
And he ranked the members of the C-suite, and he said, after the CEO, the next most important person on that list is the marketing officer. And so that's my projects were very on purpose related to the marketing team. So one was a transition off of an old analytics platform similar to Google Analytics. It's called 𝐸P. We moved from 𝐸P to Google Analytics 4, which, if you ask anyone, has been a beast for analytics across the board. So moving that over, taking the opportunity to clean up historical data, get clear processes. So it was very much not just a data job. It was very much an interdepartmental initiative. There's a lot of moving parts. It wasn't just me. There's a lot of amazing people that contributed to it. And it was something that the CMO down, she was involved, not in the details, but she was involved. We had people across my team. We had an outside analytics team. We had a consulting company that also collaborated. This is a very large project, and it had a lot of different phases. So that was one. Another was basically it's a pretty basic benchmarking project. People want to look at their results and they want to see how they did compared to their goal. Simple to say, hard to execute. That's a very complex data process because you're looking at data across time and space. You're looking at it compared to a hypothetical. You're comparing it against the previous periods, multiple periods. And so that adds, and then you have just, analytics, you can't talk about analytics engineering and not talk about semantic layer. But there's a whole lot of complexity that comes with metrics modeling versus dimensional modeling. So those are kind of a couple of the things that I've been playing with in the last little bit. And I do emphasize the word playing. I thoroughly enjoy mucking around in the data.
Definitely. And that looks because you have been into the domain for so long and your insights are quite moving on. I had a question for you on data modeling. So how has your approach to data modeling evolved as you have moved from BI analyst to senior analytics engineer at Purple?
Oh, so it definitely has evolved even before then. And it's something that I've thought about probably more than I should, but things that I do in my spare time on a Saturday morning, think about data modeling. Don't you? Right? So starting, I don't think anybody consciously says, I'm going to model using CRISP DM. I think most people that, so I got into the space wanting to be a data scientist. It is a very straightforward strategy on how to think about a data set. And that's where I think most people start. They start with a spreadsheet, and most people start in Excel or Calc or Sheets, right? It's going to be one of those three. And I would argue Excel, Calc, and Sheets is probably 98% of the data world across the planet. That's where everything starts. But once you get past a single data set, once you start combining things, doing VLOOKUPs for my Excel people, and index matches, and you need to join on two different columns at the same time. And once you start doing stuff like that, or once you get past, I don't know, 300,000 rows, and Excel starts to slow down or crash, depending on what kind of a system you've got, at that point, Python starts looking really good, because Python can just absolutely kill 400, 500, a million rows of data in seconds. So that's kind of how my path went. Is very organic, is very needs-based. I did a lot of pandas to replace my Excel workflows. And then from there, I started learning about SQL and the fallacy of fanouts, and what happens when you don't join data correctly, and how it can triple your metrics, and then when your boss sees it and he says, this is just wrong, right? I've experienced that, as has probably everyone. So from there, I think, is when you start getting into kind of discussions about data modeling, and that there's a way to do things that's just better. I've primarily done 𝐶𝐭. Primarily 𝐶𝐭. I cut my teeth in a transformation, not in a transactional data warehouse. So everything was their normal form, and it was really, really, it was really well done. And so you could kind of navigate the IDs, because they had a really clean definition for IDs, but it was very much swimming in the deep end. And now I'm playing a little bit with Data Vault, and feel like that's the next evolution of data modeling. And I feel like I said a lot. I don't know that I said
No,
many
yes.
words. I don't know that there's a whole lot of value in that. That's been my path. That's been the evolution for
That's
me.
actually a very nice point, and this bridges on to the next one because you specialize developing in MarTech stacks. So, how
Yes.
has your MarTech stack enabled companies to transform customer experiences? That's what we'd want to know.
Oh, that's a good one. So one of the things that's unique about analytics engineering, and I think is a point of maybe some anxiety, is you can come at it from two different ways. You can come at it from the engineering side, or the AWS side. You can come at it, but you can also come at it from as an analyst, which is basically how I came at it from. There's two halves to analytics engineering. There is the technical side. There is, you've got to know how to write SQL. You definitely need SQL. Python, you can get away with not being amazing at it, just kind of like, I just don't do a lot of Python. I look at Python and I edit around the edges of Python, but I just don't write a lot of Python in my day-to-day. That could change from shop to shop, but SQL you cannot get away from.
Yeah.
You have, and it's the foundation of so many other tools that use SQL as a foundational language. So there is, I'm not going to say that part doesn't matter, and it helps to be able to ingest. It helps to have some familiarity with glue, and so using a tool like 𝐮𝐩𝐢𝐬, which is awesome and much easier to implement than Airflow. I don't want to underscore that piece, but there's so many analysts who maybe want to come into the space and don't feel like they have all that, and I don't think you need it, because a big piece of analytics engineering is what, I'm not sure who, so there's a physical layer of data, right, which is the actual raw data and the tables and the warehouses and the nitty gritty. There's a conceptual layer of data, which is less clear. That conceptual layer, the way I wrap my head around it is, if I were to learn marketing, not necessarily a 101 college course, but maybe like a 201 or a 301, a little bit more in depth, but still general knowledge, not necessarily practical. That's what conceptual is. A conceptual table is not going to be Google Analytics. A conceptual table is not going to be Heap. It's not going to be, what's some of the other, it's not going to be Facebook. It's not going to be some type of what's the big one? The Trade Desk, which probably no one's ever heard. Unless you're deep in marketing, you've probably not heard of or unless you trade marketing, public marketing companies, you probably haven't heard of the Trade Desk, but you've absolutely seen ads served by the Trade Desk. All of that is physical layer data stuff. Facebook data, Heap data, Google Analytics data. Conceptual is going to be things like ad spend, things like ads, things like sessions, concepts, ideas. It's going to be the big one, the messy one for the techie, nerdy, codey people. The overloaded term is medium. That's going to be your messiest one. The word medium gets used throughout marketing in a lot of different contexts. And when you have that in your culture, which it's just the culture, it's just medium means different things to different people. It means different things to the same people in different contexts. Humans can manage and navigate that. ChatGPT can manage and navigate that. Your data warehouse cannot if you have a field that has the same name but means different things, you're going to run into problems. And getting clarity around that and things like that. An analyst has that innately. A data engineer really needs to lean on the business, and they have to take that particular partner's word for it. And if they don't have their own context, they can't differentiate what is best practice and what is that person's take on best practice. And that matters because when that person leaves the company, if your model is built on how they think about things and they're not around anymore, guess what needs to change? Your model. And so being cognizant of that, an analyst with that background and context can really add a lot of value into a tech stack, because now you can separate out what's best practice and as well consider your own unique bias in that, right? Separate what's canon from what's necessary for a specific person. You're going to be a better data modeler.
Definitely.
So yeah, there's a huge value to having analysts.
Wait, so are there any specific use cases where your stack has significantly optimized customer interaction or retention?
I'll tell you one story. We were looking at return data, and one of the things we were looking at was the return reasons, right? And from a technical perspective, what we needed to do was just categorize these things. And one of the return reasons, we used to sell pet beds. And the return reason was, my pet died, and so I don't need the bed anymore. And so she barely bought the bed for her pet, and then her pet died, so she just returned the bed. And that really hit us. Like, we felt that in a very deep way. That's not really optimizing an experience for that customer, at least not in an obvious way. But one thing I'm a big proponent of is championing the customer voice, identifying what is it. So people just don't spend money to spend money. There's a purpose, there's a reason, there's usually a job that they need to fill. What are those jobs? What are those problems? And then who are your customers? And what is unique about them? And actually providing a context for that. Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, talks about marketing to soccer moms. But then he goes a step, I think he calls them cohorts with teeth or something like that. He'll say, you want to go after soccer moms that like heavy metal, that also, aren't vegan but eat vegan ice cream, like just super specific
Yeah.
cultural things. One of those demographics for purple mattresses is tech. Tech people tend to have additional money to spend on better quality things. And so there's a significant component of customers that it also has a very techie nerdy brand that they're trying to kind of pivot away from. But to have a bed company target tech people specifically is not normal.
Yeah.
But that kind of a thing, right? When you take the time to really understand who your customers are, what they need, more than just looking at them as an age group or they live in this area, but actually taking an interest in what their passions are, what values do they have, what causes do they champion, and actually enabling communication. That's the core, I think, of really creating a brand that changes an experience as opposed to just selling stuff.
This also made me think about your work extensively on scaling models. So this is also a part which enters because they are also trying to focus on a very niche type of an audience. So can you explain the difference between the conceptual, logical, and physical dimensional modeling you mentioned? Because this might help here.
About something, or something in the business changed, something needs to be included that didn't exist before, there's a bug, like something. If I'm looking at this query, it's not because I'm looking at, it's not a piece of art that I'm looking at in a museum. I'm not appreciating it. There's like something I got to do with this thing. And my time has a cost too. So intuitive is my, like, you don't think about that in performance.
Yeah.
But how long does it take the developer to look at this query and understand what it's doing? So making a query, and that doesn't mean comment everything, because I'm actually, if you have to comment, your query is not clear enough. But sometimes what you're doing is weird because the business needs you to do something weird. You should put a comment to explain, hey, this is weird, this is why.
Right.
But usually the code should be clear. Uh, you shouldn't bury your sources, throughout 1,000 row
Hmm.
line of code. Put some CTs at the top, cite your sources at the top, so we know what's feeding this thing. What are your ingredients?
Yes.
And then from there, yeah, looking at joins is going to be kind of your next most what's the word I'm looking for? Lowest hanging fruit, right? Is, are you joining things?
Yeah.
And then from there you can get really into the weeds of, right, if we're looking at Snowflake, uh, this is where I do a commercial for the SnowPro certification. I'm not SnowPro certified, but I've met people who are SnowPro certified, and you can geek out on the different kinds of tables that Snowflake has, and use them in different ways to make not necessarily the query, but the entire pipeline more performant. And that
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoy getting into like that's, I think, part of one of the more enjoyable, not the most enjoyable, but I do enjoy. Uh, they're not really. So I look at coding as writing. There's no such thing as good writing. Writers will tell you that. There's only good editing. And I feel a code is very much the same way. You can write something, but if you review it with a editor or just another pair of eyes, and you debate it and discuss it, usually the people in the room are pretty smart, and those are some very awesome discussions to have
Yeah.
about some very persnickety tiny things. But I enjoy those conversations a lot.
Yeah, that's really well put. And just wanted to know that how do these stages interrelate in a typical data modeling process, which you just mentioned? Because as you mentioned, Snowflake, that will also have one of these steps involved, I guess.
So I want to talk about Data Vault, which is like the most complicated thing you could possibly talk about. I'm gonna, so just to, if you're listening to this, Google Data Vault and like spend some time with it, because it is. So
Yeah.
there's a couple of terms. Data Vault. There's Inman, Kimball. Kimball is star schema.
Mm.
Inman is kind of your traditional third normal form. It's a variation on third normal form. It isn't exactly the same thing, but it's similar. And then you've got, I'm going to throw in crisp DM, crisp hyphen DM. as another model. And then there's also big wide table, which I think Google pushed really heavily because space is cheap and you can just throw everything into one giant big table, which yes, you shouldn't, don't do that. It probably has its place somewhere too.
Yeah.
So let's just do, like, assume you're looking at the Titanic data set, just to keep a really low bar, right? Everyone who's listening to this has either looked at the Titanic data set or has heard of it. It's just a spreadsheet, right, with some data. It's not very much data at all. Logically, you're looking at the field names. I'm actually going to pull it up real quick. Give me a second.
Yeah.
Titanic data set. Right? You can go to 𝐤𝐲𝐬𝐤, however you want to pronounce it. So logic layer is the data dictionary, right? We're looking at the fields are survival, P class, sex, age, 𝐮𝐧𝐩𝐬𝐬𝐤, parch, ticket, fare, cabin, embarked. You've got your definitions. Sex is defined as sex. Survival is defined as survival. There's nothing in the dictionary to tell me if these are ints or strings or it's dates, right? There's nothing.
Yeah.
I would expect embarked to be maybe a date, but it's not. It's the port, and it's actually a letter. So this is your plot. This is your logical layer. This is data in its rawest form.
Yeah.
On the conceptual side is the simplest to look at is probably sex, but it has different meanings, right? It has different meanings. In this case, it means gender.
Yeah.
And so, but now, depending on the organization that you're in, you might be in an organization that really champions kind of more progressive ideas on gender and more inclusive ideas about gender. And so this data is a bit dated. And so you have specific context that you have to consider in terms of who's consuming this data. That is your conceptual layer. It has very little to do with the actual data itself. It has everything to do with what you're using it for. And making it, I mean, as an analytics person, your goal is to help people make decisions. Part of that is understanding their decision-making process. What are their values? What's important? What are the strategic things that we're trying to go after, right? Like, does sex have anything to do with that? Probably not. But there are other things that have multiple contexts. And so that's where this conceptual layer is very different from the physical layer, because it doesn't, data is an input. It's not the only input. And then we can do the same thing for all of these. 𝐮𝐳𝐵, sibling, spouse. I'm exaggerating. I know what that thing is. Yeah. That's a terrible name. That is a terrible name. So the logic layer is where you're going to clean up, right? One of the things you're going to do is clean things up. 𝐮𝐵 needs to get cleaned up because you have siblings and spouses. And in most places on the planet, that shouldn't be the same person. And so why do we have them kind of bucketed into the exact same field? We got to break that apart. So one, we need to clean it up so that the field name is a little cleaner. But two, we've got a whole bunch of re-engineering that needs to happen to try and separate out the data so that it's cleaner. That's a more logical, that's not really a concept thing, that's a clarity thing. The embarked is going to be, it looks like embarked is just letters, right? So you got to replace C with, I can't pronounce 𝐿, Q with Queenstown, S with Southampton, right? These kinds of things I think we do get into. This is where you have your case statements and you're reclassing information into new buckets and things like that. But I think that's the extent of what we do. We really don't get past that logical layer into really modeling concepts that are what the business is how the business is thinking about a domain.
Yeah. What are the things you would love to work on as an analytics engineer?
What do I really enjoy? So I really enjoy, really, I can't underscore enough, starting my week on Monday morning and not talking to anybody. Monday morning, the ability to, right, I've got my screens, the ability to turn the world off because it's Monday. None of us are really in a good mood. To be able to just say, I'm going to just work on some stuff. Usually it's stuff that may have not gotten done. Like I was almost done on Friday and it just needs a little bit of tidying up. But it's usually code, right? And so I really enjoy those moments. So Monday morning is one of those times. Usually my schedule historically has been Tuesday, Thursdays are my meeting days. And so I'll go into the office and I genuinely enjoy being in the office with other smart people. And specifically people that I wouldn't come across. Like they wouldn't be my friends. They're not my family. They are kind of randomly selected in many ways. Our paths would not cross. And so those kinds of interactions with people who I wouldn't necessarily interact with, value that a ton. And it has its place, right? And then on Wednesday, I get to have my little cocoon back where I can just go to work and code. And so, yeah, so that's kind of high picture, what I really enjoy in terms of week to week. From there, I really like solving bugs. I like having solved the bug. I like that feeling that you get when something's broken and that moment when it runs and it's fixed. That feeling is amazing. But the feeling right before it, the feeling where you don't know what's happening, the frustration and the banging the head against the wall and the imposter syndrome of feeling like you suck and just all of that, like just the low to the high, like that jump. It's not like jumping out of a plane, but I'm never going to jump out of a plane. That's just not how I get down.
Yeah.
But I love fixing stuff that's broken. And that feeling of like it's broken and now it's fixed. Like that's a really cool feeling.
What are the must-have skills and tools you would recommend into an analytics engineer's arsenal?
Okay. So I plugged Ethan, Aaron at Portable. I plugged Snowflake. I'll plug DBT. DBT is amazing. Yeah. I plugged Mage AI. If you're like new to engineering, like if you want to learn how to take the Titanic data set and automatically ingest it into a model, download Mage AI and play with it. You're going to need to learn Docker. You probably, if you're doing that, you probably have no idea what Docker is. Learn. It's not hard. You don't need to be an expert at Docker, but do that. So I'm starting on like the opposite side from where I started, right? So that's if you want to go down that route. The steps are pretty straightforward. I'll plug Joe Reese's book, Fundamentals of Data Engineering, because it has a really good picture of the path. You've got your ingest, you've got your staging, you've got your transformations, and then you have your information modeling. I butchered that, but that's generally kind of what you're doing. The middle pieces, you need Snowflake. You can't get away from it, even if you do it in Tableau, right? You can use Tableau for free. Tableau's internal language is based on SQL. Looker's LookML language is based on SQL, right? So every other data language that's out there, its roots are in SQL. You need to know SQL. You can't get away from it. You don't need to know every data. You do know, I think what's more important is what you don't need to know. You don't need to know neural networking. You don't need to know all the different fancy scikit-learn packages. You don't need Keras. You don't need TensorFlow. You don't need PyTorch. What you do need to know is how to pass a SQL interview, right? You need to know how to select star from where having. You need to be able to join three tables. You need to be able to do a window function. And if they ask you to do recursion, they're kind of being jerks for like an entry level, but they might, and it's not because they're being jerks. If you answered the first 4, did I do 4? Whatever the number is.
Yeah.
They might ask you a recursion question, not because they're jerks, but because they're going to keep asking you questions until you can't answer them, and you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And be okay with the fact that you can't answer every question, because I can't answer every question. That's why we have ChatGPT. That's why we have Google. That's why we have each other. Like, SQL is a deceptively complex language. It's the working parts are far and few, but anyone who spent time in SQL knows like there's a lot under the hood, and it has nothing to do with keywords or commands. It's all about understanding how the data is flowing underneath. So that would be the other thing that I would say is the only way you're going to get knowledge about data is playing with data. So find data sets that interest you, that are real, that are messy, and spend time digging through them, and just gain that muscle of seeing how the data, they call it data wrangling for a reason. Like, it doesn't play nicely. So learn like kind of how data, because it tends to do some of the same things. So getting that, and frankly, I enjoy that. Right? I like wrangling. I like getting into it and digging through a field and figuring out all the edge cases and just, playing.
Yeah.
That's not for everybody, right? But if you're listening to this, if you're still listening to this, you're probably in the right place. You would have found a different podcast by now. But yeah, I would say those are the and then on the other side, right? If you're an analyst doing stuff in Excel, download Tableau and play with Tableau, and then go. You start at the ends and then come to the middle, right? SQL's in the middle. You've got Tableau. Well, I guess you need some SQL and Python for 𝐻𝐻𝐸, but yeah, you just pick an end and start working towards the middle.
Got it. When exploring new tools, like you mentioned, how can analytics engineers assess their fitness for their projects?
So results, like, when you say fitness, are you talking about like my personal fitness for a project or the project's fitness?
So the tool itself as well, how fit does it acquire to be for that particular project and for the personal fitness in terms
Oh,
of using that tool as well.
so tooling, I'm not an advocate of spending a lot of time on tools. So as much as I mentioned 𝐻𝐻𝐸, you don't need experience with 𝐻 to get a job. You don't need experience with dbt or Snowflake to get a job. You do need experience querying a large data set. You can do that for free. Pretty sure you can do that for free I know you can do it for free in Google Cloud Platform. I know you can do it for practically free in Snowflake. I mean, you might be spending $1, a couple of dollars, because they give you free credits. And then I would assume there's some type of free tier on AWS, but every AWS has only been professional experience, right? So someone else is paying the bill. So I never had to worry about a free tier in AWS. I'm guessing there's something like that. But that's what it looks like. It's not doing coursework in SQL. It's actual querying actual data. That you need. You need to be able to pass a SQL test. From there, the tools are selected, right? If I learned Go because where I worked used Go, and they didn't expect me to know Go going into it, but they did expect me to learn it pretty quickly. Most people, if they're going to show you their specific Python scripts that they use for different jobs, most jobs you're not starting from scratch. So I don't necessarily advocate a specific tool. It's just those things that we already talked about. Those things are universal.
Awesome.
As you progress in your career, specializing in tools matters.
How does a clean code, as you mentioned before, that you are also fond of the code, so how does a clean code contribute to the effectiveness of a domain's tech stack? Because it would consist all the tools.
Sure. So I'll drop Mark Romero's name. he's the one that taught me this, the idea of clean code. He was my boss at Agility, and I worked with Mark prior to that. Absolute stud, like phenomenal coder. And as a junior coder, right, in school, they teach you comment your code. And so your code looks like a line of code and a comment. And it's like every line of code is commented. And he basically taught me, like, no, if your code isn't clear, right, if I can't tell what your code is doing without a comment, it's just, your code should just be done clearly. And for me, the way I learned that was having to go back and look at my own code 6 months later without any context, not remembering what I did. Could I read it? And another thing I think that's really helped with that is looking at other people's code, because it's not necessarily that my way is right and their way is wrong. That's not the case, but we're intelligent and we think about things differently. And so what's another thing I enjoy about my job is you get to see how people think about things in their SQL code, and you see some stuff that's just, it's right and it's smart, but it's just not what you would have done, and now you're better off for it. But then you can kind of add your little twist to it, and it can be smart and right and still not intuitive. And it just takes a long time to understand what's happening. And so paying attention to that, right? Again, having someone else look at it, and then realizing what are some of the things that you wish you had when you were debugging code, and making a point to include those things in your code. Using white space. There's the debate of leading commas versus trailing commas. I'm a leading comma guy, and that has sparked some hot debates on our team. And ultimately, we, across multiple teams, those teams, we basically fell on just be consistent, use one or the other, don't use both. Right. But yeah, other than comment, when I guess if you had to spend some time chewing on an idea before you got the code through, if it wasn't really easy for you to code it, right? Select star from we're having, not hard. But when you're doing some kind of weird case statement that's not intuitive, and you had to think about it, write what you were thinking about. How did you come up with this solution? What were the issues that presented themselves that forced you to have to consider this? Because those issues, may not exist in 6 months, and then you can just comment or delete the code out. So those are a couple of things on clean code.
Nice.
DBT's got some great stuff on that as well.
Yeah, and if you could share some examples of how this practice has improved the performance or reliability of the tools you have in your stack or you have developed.
So one of the things that's low-hanging fruit is cost, and it's easy to count dollars. Doesn't mean it's the only thing that counts, but it is easy to count. So specifically the cost of, right, we have tools that we use to automate certain processes. Some of those tools are expensive. If you innovate in the space and can essentially make those tools irrelevant and essentially retire a tool, that's a win for the team. And so paying attention to your stack and seeing, what are all the tools that we're using? Do we need them all? And reviewing that on a cadence. How reliant are we? Like, if we were to stop using this tool, how painful would that be? One of the jobs that I was hired into, the company realized that they couldn't move away from a tool because all the logic was embedded in that tool. And so my job was to create a stack that was more modular so that we could swap tools out if we wanted to. And that wasn't the case, right? These tools that we retired, we had logic embedded in them. We couldn't just stop using them. We had to pull the logic out, consolidate, and it comes back to that data modeling where you have a dedicated staging area, a dedicated transformation area, a dedicated information area. Like you have different spots where you do things. You don't transform data in your ingestion tool, which happens, right?
Yeah.
So step one is modular, like have your process be modular. Step two is looking at what tools you have, what tools can you get rid of, because those tools are pricey, and that makes pretty good headlines when you can say, we're no longer using this tool anymore.
Yeah.
That's money back on the balance sheet, or the projected money that we had to spend on this other tool. You might contract to spend $100,000 a year with a tool. Well, if you're $40,000 under budget, that's a good problem to have, right? That reflects well on you.
Yeah.
But the real measure is how well can you support a C-suite decision maker in executing on the business initiatives. And that's hard to measure because it's not you can't point to something that you did. And how do you say, oh, you succeeded because I built you a dashboard?
Yeah.
It's hard to tie, but ultimately it's winning with a team. If they succeed, right, if you're supporting their win and they win, you win. So call it a win, right? Don't get so worried about showing your piece of it. Focus on helping, right? If the marketing team wins, the whole company wins, right? So just help them win.
Great.
And be less concerned about what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And the point of flexibility, bang on. I totally agree. And this brings us to the next one. So, what challenges did you resolve with tools like dbt, Snowflake, AWS, and LookML to support the conceptual, logical, and physical stages which you talk about in dimensional modeling?
So dbt steals the show. We have Snowflake has some stuff natively. Atlan has so I'm thinking specifically of lineage graphs. Atlan's lineage graph is very powerful because it can go anywhere and everywhere. But as far as visually, for me, my bias is dbt. dbt's lineage graph, and they can, not just that it's good, they continue to improve it. They have a developer version, and then they have an entire tab, the Explore tab, that's just dedicated to viewing how your pipeline looks, right, from ingest to delivery. And that Explorer tab is specifically designed for non-technical people. It's designed for analysts. It's designed for data savvy decision makers who want to see how something is defined, and they want to get into the nitty gritty, and they want to be exposed to the code, but they don't want to be inside a developer environment to see it. It's really good at that. And when people have technical questions, it's great visually to essentially pull up and essentially use as a PowerPoint, if you will, where you can have something interactive that you can engage people with. That's probably I've used dbt a lot in that way.
So, what are the top three aspects you believe in are lacking in the current data engineering stack, which make the day-to-day of analytics engineers very challenging?
Top three. So, give me a second. The first one came right away. I just don't know that I want to lead with that one. So coming out of 2020, right? A lot of companies had hockey stick growth, just rocket ship, just things just blew up. It was amazing. And a lot of companies spent money and bought into that growth and invested as if this growth was going to happen forever. And I'm betting a lot of analytics teams went to their decision makers and said, this isn't normal. It's not going to stick around forever. It's going to come back down. And then when it did start coming back down, there was a lot of weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth, where it was going to, you go to zero, right, is just going to go down forever. If not over, like even if maybe it wasn't said out loud, people didn't consciously believe that, but that's how it felt. Like there was going to be no bottom, or the bottom would be too painful, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was many analytics teams that said, this is revision to the mean. You can literally plot a mean on historical growth and see what's happening. And you didn't need complex tools to do that. In fact, we pulled up Google Trends and we're able to show that just using Google Trends, right? Not even open source, just a public website where you can just look at search trends. It was evident, just very obvious. And I told you so is not a persuasive tactic. But what I think a lot of analytics teams were frustrated that they had answers that were of benefit to the business, but it fell on deaf ears, and these people don't know what they're doing, and blah, 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 right? There's just kind of like this feeling of what am I doing here? That I think that feeling is real. And so the piece that's missing is the communication piece of taking ownership and saying, well, if I had a message that would have helped the company and I presented it and they didn't see it, how much of that do I own, and what can I do to improve my communication? A lot of people think, and I'm one of them, data speaks for itself, right? The figures don't lie. If I look at this table and I come to this conclusion, it's obvious. Just look at the data. I would say a lot of decision makers have that same opinion, but it's very obvious in the current world climate. People look at the same data and come to very different conclusions. And so that ability to see things from other people's perspective, the ability to be persuasive and talk to people in terms of their interests and their values and their worldview, not your worldview, and speak to that worldview. I'm sorry, that's just outside our wheelhouse. That's not like that's not my personality. I'm a task-oriented person. I'm not a touchy-feely relationship person. That's why I'm really good at what I do. If I was good at that stuff, I'd be a salesperson. And in many ways, I'm saying you kind of have to take some sales classes and learn how to persuade and communicate. But be mindful of the fact of I guess give yourself some grace and recognize this is not my skill set and call it out. I'm not good at it, but that is what I do. I tell them, look, this is me trying to do my best at something that's I'm not at my best, but let's have a conversation, right? Tell me. My approach is curiosity. I ask them to explain things to me. It's not foolproof. It's very much an alpha process. It fits me. Yeah, that's probably number 1, 2, and 3, because that's a really, really big one. And it's just hard. It's just hard.
Absolutely. That's 3 spot on, and I'm glad that I asked you that question because you summed it up very nicely. And this is also true for people all around the world, not just a specific area of a specific organization. So legacy models are hard to work with. What are some of the modeling techniques or best practices you advocate to decouple from that complexity?
Legacy modeling. So I've yet to work with a legacy model that was modeled in some kind of a form, whether it was Kimball or Inman or Data Vault. It was usually something like Big Table. But the thing is, it's not that it had a single modeling. The issue with legacy is not that it's a single model. The issue is that it's multiple models. You have multiple people contributing, and even an individual contributor isn't consistent because the needs for each individual report or data science analysis, like whatever it was different, and the needs were different. And so even if their approach was consistent, it had different questions that it was answering, different contexts, and so the modeling was different. So the issue is that it's not one model, but it's multiple models. And the word that comes to mind for me is spaghetti. It's spaghetti model. It's everything and anything, and it's all over the place, and it's untangling that, right? So how do you I guess the question is, how do you do that? How do you get away from that? I think it starts with a lift and shift. So usually you're going to be onboarding some kind of a tool, whether it's Snowflake or DBT or something. It's going to give you the chance to pick it up and just move it somewhere else. Make a copy of it, right? And then you start picking at a piece, right? You pick one noodle. And this is where you partner with the business, right? You find your chief marketing officer. You identify all the noodles that affect her or him. In my case, it was a her, and she was absolutely phenomenal. And then you go to work, right, on that section, and you make a point to delete the old code. Once it's not running, you comment it out, see if anything blows up, and then you delete. And you don't look back. Don't put it in a graveyard. Delete, because if you're deleting it, you're going to do the optimization correctly. If you hold out and say, oh, we'll just save it just in case something happens, no, go into it planning to delete it and burn the boat, right, as you will, with that old story about the soldiers that showed up on the shore and they burned their boats. That's how they won the war, because they had to go back on the enemy's boats. Right, burn the boat, delete. That's a lot easier said than done. That is a massively complex project. I don't know that it's not something I could do by myself. Ask for a project manager, even if it's part-time, even if it's you can't get a dedicated project manager. Like, if you can't get a project manager, but you have project managers at the company, get up, walk over to where they are, or put time on their calendar and Zoom them. Ask them for their insight and opinion and advice. If you don't have a project manager at your company, network on LinkedIn and find one, and ask them for their advice. If you need to move, like, ask ChatGPT to pretend to be a project manager and ask ChatGPT, but recognize that project management, like, it's a big project. It's not small. You need to treat it with the due respect, because if you don't manage it, it's just going to blow up in your face.
So a quick light question for you. If you had to use an analogy to stress the importance of data models in an organization, what would that be?
An analogy. So this is actually a pretty good analogy, and I've used it a couple of times. So when people from the chief marketing officer perspective, or the CEO, your data stack for most companies is the attic of the house. So you go up there and you got to store things, right? Like, if you describe what a data warehouse is, it's basically an attic where you start putting things that you want to hold on to, but that you don't necessarily need every day, but you just want to hold on to it. Well, everyone in the company starts doing that. And so people start picking corners, and then they pick sections of the wall, and then someone comes in and says, well, I don't really like how that is over there, so I'm going to move some stuff around and then put my stuff on top. And if you're, so I don't have an attic, I have a garage, but if your space is anything like my space, the newer stuff is closer to the door, because at this point you can't see the walls anymore. It's just a room full of crap. The newest stuff is close to the door, and you don't even know what's in the back. That's generally what a data looks like. And so the newer things are closer, and you can get to them. And if you need to kind of dig in a little further and grab something that's older, you just kind of dig and dig until you can pull it out. And so that's what a lot of kind of early stage data warehouse stacks look like.
That was a brilliant analogy.
What I do is categorize that and make it a library. take everything out, build some shelves, organize it, index it, so that everything is searchable. And if you have stuff that you don't need anymore, I throw it away.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's
the
kind of
best.
the analogy.
Yeah, that's one of the best ones I've heard so far. Thank you, Ro. Thank you for that analogy. So, as the analytics engineer stack develops, do you see it becoming easier to understand the impact of an analytics engineer or a team of that guy functions on the key business KPIs like ROI or ARR? How?
I don't know. There's definitely a debate on that.
Mhm.
Uh, and the one side says you're going to see, as you see tools improve, as you see AI make things like modeling, just AWS stuff, the engineering, connecting to an API, as Snowflake improves its data shares and the ability to share data across, right? So if I have a Snowflake data share and I want to share to a Databricks customer, right? Having kind of universal data sharing, right? As those type of things kind of come to fruition,
Hmm.
you're just not going to need as many people. And so maybe you need someone who can just do, end to end, that knows the AWS side, but also understands marketing at a really deep level.
Hmm.
There is a contingent of people that say, yeah, that person is going to get the job, and that is the job, is you just have to have that breadth of knowledge. That's a lot of information.
Yeah.
um, I think it could, in some businesses that's necessary.
Yeah.
uh, I, I think that there's just a lot to know there, and to be really deep in the weeds across the spectrum
Yeah.
from AWS to Google Analytics 4 and everything in between. That's just a lot. And
Yeah.
so the need to have someone who can really understand the business, but that has that technical ability, um,
Yeah. So
is gonna endure.
this is one of your favorites, the semantic layer, which you talked about. So the
Hmm.
community is abuzz with semantics and a dedicated logical modeling layer. So what are some of the myths you have observed that surround the semantic layer?
I think the biggest, I don't know that it's a myth. I think the semantic layer means different things. Like we all think it means something else.
Hmm.
And so there's just not a lot of clarity onto what it is. The best way I've heard it put is, can we just call it a metrics layer?
Hmm.
It's just the layer where this is where you model your metrics. I'm probably in that camp.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm trying to think of like what other people have said, like why it can't just be a metrics layer. I've definitely heard other ideas on what a semantic layer is and what it includes. Um, in my mind, it really is the place where you put your metrics. It's
Hmm.
where you do all the pivoting and the aggregating, and you set up your data, so that it can be ingested into some type of a BI tool, whether
Hmm.
that's Sigma or Power BI or Looker or Tableau.
Yeah, that does make sense. And that continues to the next question as well, because uh, we need to bridge the gap. So, where do you see the future of dimensional modeling heading with the rise of new technologies like the semantic layer in the data engineering space?
Uh, so I do think there is going to be a reduction in the number of tools. I think
Oh.
DBT is smart in specifying, trying to own like a specific piece
Hmm.
of the stack, as opposed to trying to be, a lot of tools right now, they try to be the whole thing, which, right, in the case of Looker, it works. Looker is a super sticky tool.
Hmm.
I've come across a lot of people, both uh, companies that I've worked at, as well as companies that I've interviewed for, and people that I've talked to. I met a lot of people who want to get off Looker,
Hmm.
that don't like Looker, but they can't leave Looker because
Hmm.
they're stuck on Looker.
Hmm.
Um, so that kind of full stack tool that can do just anything and everything. Um, it's not the prettiest, right? That's Tableau,
Yeah.
but it's really good at ad hoc analysis,
Hmm.
and it's really intelligently built.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of people that don't like it, and so but that's but they're stuck on it. So there is a model for, you know, one-stop shop, and that, I think, for smaller companies, attractive to just have one tool to do everything.
That's quite
I
cool.
honestly don't know. I did not know what an analytics engineer was 3 years ago. That's not a term I was familiar with. Data scientist was not a term that I was familiar with when I was in school. It wasn't until after school that I even heard the term data scientist, and I was an econ major.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain the job I have in 10 years doesn't exist.
Yes.
And so this skill set will matter, but it'll be called something else. And so that's where these kinds of things, listening to podcasts, getting on LinkedIn, talking to people, arguably, right, we are nerds. This is not what we do.
Yeah.
But putting yourself in that uncomfortable situation, recognizing that, hey, at the very least, it's other nerds. We all hate that.
Yes.
We're not social butterflies.
But
Yeah, just sending that connection request, being open, I think is your best safeguard against,
yes.
you know, preparing for the future. It's just knowing and hearing and listening to all of us.
Yes, looking into the future cannot be done without looking into the present. So, yes, talking, connecting, that's a great insight for everyone. Thank you. And that
For
brings us to
sure.
the next question, which is also a problem for many of the analytics engineers, resolving piled up requests. So, have data catalogs made the lives of analytics engineers simpler in terms of resolving these piled up requests?
I think it's a necessary step, and it depends on the data catalog. I will say, as much as I like DBT's lineage graph, Atlan, getting Atlan on board really changed the conversation, because not everybody, as much as DBT has a place for people who aren't developers, Atlan has an ability to just plug itself in browser into all, like, it's natively in each tool, and it really did facilitate the conversation. And so really it was about not necessarily data catalog, it was having conversations. And so having conversations outside of the data team, getting buy-in across the business, that's really where things are going to start changing, not necessarily in the tool. But Atlan really paved the way for us to do that.
And on to the next question, which is also a banger. Have you heard or worked with data products?
Have I worked with data products?
Yeah, have you heard about it or worked in building data products, knowing about them?
I'm not. So when you say data products, I'm thinking Snowflake, DBT, Atlan,
Yeah, so
Mage.
there are many different definitions going on in the market. So, what is a definition? That's the right question we should start with. What is
What's
a
the
data product
definition
for
of a
you?
data product?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I don't know that I feel like, I guess that's something I would throw into Perplexity to try to get some clarity on. I'll give you a dumb example to kind of illustrate the point.
Yeah.
The beard oil that I bought when I started growing my beard, right, which is a few years ago,
Yep.
I got beard oil,
Mhm.
and the beard oil came with a little booklet on how to take care of a beard.
Okay.
You could call that a data product. That beard oil, all they were selling was oil, but they included this informational component that greatly enhanced my ability to grow a beard.
Yeah.
They didn't have to do that. I would say that that's a data product, right?
Yes.
If you provide a service, right? If I cut hair for a living, providing people with information on how to maintain that hair, right? If I color their hair, that's a data product. So yeah, I would argue the branding of a company is right, helping people understand your company's values and how your values align with their values, and your mission. A lot of companies have missions, and what causes you're supporting, right? These are things that a lot of companies, you know, data analysts will cynically say they do it just to boost profits, but a lot of companies genuinely value like causes, and they champion causes that they feel very passionately about.
Yes.
And consumers want to align with those businesses. Communicating that is squarely the marketing department's job. I see that as a data product.
Yes.
It's communicate. Now that's probably not the quite this. I've totally taken this off the rails in a different definition.
This is so nice.
That's an informational project, right? So yeah, I think that's a very, I don't know, the idea of a data product, but this is me. That's that's just my brain.
And if it goes to different teams and adds value to their life, then that data product is also successful. That's something I could take from your answer, and that's really valuable.
Yeah.
And
on the flip side, we were talking in the beginning a lot about people maybe trying to break into the space, right? Aspiring. Data is everywhere. And so your ability to just leverage data to enhance your team is, let's say you're not an analyst. Well, you still use data somehow.
Yes.
And so there's an in there, right? Because data is everywhere. Everyone, if there's something course you want to explore, everyone has an in. Doesn't matter what you're doing.
Yeah, it's just a matter of learning what you're trying to do and how do you. What are your go-to resources or communities for staying updated on the latest developments in analytics tools and technologies and, let's say, data products? How do you learn about these things?
So LinkedIn for sure. The data community on LinkedIn is fabulous.
Yes.
It just is. It's very like I would argue that Twitter embodies, at least in people's minds, it's like everything that's terrible about social media is on Twitter.
Yes.
I would say that LinkedIn is the opposite. LinkedIn and Threads data community is also really good. I don't spend a ton of time on Threads, but I want to. Threads' data community is really awesome, and then LinkedIn is really awesome as well. The other thing I'd say is meetups, your local meetups. If you don't have local data meetups, so you could go to meetup.com. But if you can't do that, right, you just can't find anything, you can also try Googling low-key data happy hour. And it's not a national thing, but there's a bunch of them. They just kind of, so I just started, if you're in the Utah area, I run the one in Utah. It's very decentralized. Nice. If you don't have one in your area, because I'm pretty sure there's not one in India, start one. And if you want to know how to start it, reach out to me. It's not hard. But yeah, meeting with people face to face, I think, is the other thing.
Yes.
Because people will tell you, that's how I heard about DBT. Because I would go to meetups, I would go to Snowflake events, I would go to the other companies' type events, and everyone kept bringing up DBT.
Yes.
So that's probably those two things: LinkedIn, and then going to local networking events.
Absolutely. Let's keep going. And definitely, I'm going to approach you for starting that one community here in India. So we have.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It's super. So when I asked for the information, I was surprised at how short it was. Like, it's not hard.
I would really like to talk about your work-life balance just in a short bit so that people are aware, having all this knowledge, using it for your own good and for the company's good. So how do you maintain a healthy work-life balance while keeping up the fun at work?
So I have a non-traditional answer to that. Stephen King, they ask him, right, because he says he writes every day. And they ask him, do you really write every day? And he said, well, I take off Christmas and my birthday. And the truth is, he doesn't. He writes on Christmas. What he does do, though, is he takes breaks. Like, once he's done writing a book, he'll take a break. And then he'll come back to it, and then he'll write again.
Yeah.
But the thing is, he loves writing. He just loves writing. And so he writes. That's what he does. I'm kind of the same way. I've worked since I was a little kid. I mean, I've had a job since I was 8 years old.
Oh, nice.
I've had multiple jobs. I had more jobs by the time I turned 18
Hmm.
than most people have had in their life.
Oh,
I've
nice.
worked a lot. I've worked a lot in a lot of different places.
Hmm.
Working is just part of who I am. That's why I say it's a non-traditional answer.
Yes.
I enjoy working. I
Hmm.
like what I do, and so I do tend to work more than other people do,
Yes.
but I do it because I choose to. But the other piece, as far as balance goes, I stole from Grant Cardone. I
Hmm.
make time for my kids. I make time for my wife. They don't need a lot of time from me, but I make sure that the time's quality, right? My
Oh.
kids, when they need it, they need it. I show up at their games.
Hmm.
When I'm at their games, I'm at their games. I'm not on my phone.
Yeah.
When I talk to them, I talk to them. I'm
Hmm.
not letting them go like this while I'm on my phone,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But then I also invite them, like I will show them what I'm doing,
Hmm.
and so yeah, like today, like the next 3 days, I'm gonna go do a storytelling festival. I'm gonna
Oh,
unplug, and I'm not even gonna think about being on LinkedIn. I'm not gonna think about other stuff. I'm gonna just do that.
nice.
Um,
That's
but
beautiful.
yeah, that's kind of what I do.
Thank you for joining us on season 1 of Analytics Heroes. For more information, visit moderndata101.com, or you can also find us Analytics Heroes on Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts. Click subscribe so you don't miss any future episode. And on behalf of the team here at Modern, thanks for listening.